I think often pre-med students worry about things when there's no reason to worry because you have no control over it.
Welcome to Ask the Dean, episode 23.
23, and you and me.
Yep. So how are you tonight, Dr. James Wright?
I'm doing well, Ms. Rachel Grubbs. How are you?
Yeah, what did we decide? Not a doctor, Rachel Grubbs. So for those of you who are used to seeing Ryan Gray, fear not. Dr. Gray is going to join us tonight. He's going to be a few minutes late, and we wanted to go ahead and start on time, but he'll just jump into the stream whenever he can make it.
Yep.
So as always, if you have already posted a question, we'll take a look and get to it in a few minutes. If you haven't already, go ahead and type in the comments.
Yeah.
And we'll be answering your questions live for the next 45 minutes or so.
Yeah, and we got a question today, I think, that would be good to kind of jump on to.
Sure.
And the question came into our, as you recall, Rachel, came into our mailbox, and it was about transcripts.
Yeah. So,
and why don't you go over what that question was?
So the question was kind of interesting because it was worded in a way that was a little unfamiliar to me. But so what the student said was, he says, I believe there are barcodes or forms that need to be submitted with one's transcripts when applying to medical school. Are these forms or barcodes submitted with our transcripts available at any time? Or do we have to wait for the application service to open up before we can submit these forms to the registrar?
Yeah, and so this is a good question. This is kind of about a question about the logistics of the process, really. And the short answer to that question is transcripts, you need to wait on transcripts until you've actually started the application and until the application opens for the cycle. And because they're only good for one cycle. And the forms with the barcodes on them, they're helpful, but they're not required. And the reason they're helpful is because, as you might expect, these application services get thousands and tens of thousands of transcripts every year. And because there's no individual code on them that indicates who they belong to, the application service depends on looking at the name, and obviously lots of people have similar names, or if not identical names. And then they also have to, figure out, in other words, they're figuring out who does this transcript belong to, which applicant does this belong to. And so the form helps them. If that form is received with the transcript, then it gives an identifier for which application that belongs to. So it's not required. It's very helpful for the application services, but it's not required. But definitely, absolutely, do not send the transcripts ahead of time, and wait until you have started the process.
Great.
That's the best way to do it. I know a lot of students want to get the jump on it and get things out of the way and go ahead and do that, but yeah, that's not something that's going to be.
Okay. Well, I think that leads really nicely to a follow-up question, which is, okay, so it's November and I'm applying in May and I'm jittery and I want to get the jump on it. I've just learned from the brilliant Dr. James Scott Wright that I shouldn't go ahead with transcript ordering yet. It's a little early. What can I be doing right now to be preparing for applications?
Yeah, that's a good question. And I just had that question with one of my students that I'm working with in the cycle. And he's in classes. And so my particular advice to him was, or will be, we haven't met yet, but my particular advice to him will be relax, breathe, do well in your courses. After the semester's over, he's going to be really hitting it hard in terms of MCAT prep, because he's taking the MCAT in late January. And so that's the real key. If you're not in school, then there's really nothing you can do. I mean, you can start working on your personal statement a little bit, but I don't even really recommend that. I think you've got plenty of time after the first of the year to get knocking on that. So
Okay.
I think at this point, it's just, you just got to chill out, and there's really not a whole lot you can do if you're applying next May for the 22 cycle.
Mm-hmm. Okay. All right. So here's a question. Hi, I hope you're well despite the craziness of the world. Thank you. You
Yes.
too.
Yep.
I'm really feeling the craziness, so I take that comment to heart. Thank you.
Me too.
The question is, what are some big red flags you've seen in personal statements when reading them?
Yeah, big red flags. So, the obvious big red flag is misspelled words, grammatical errors, difficulty really reading because the syntax is so bad, or just the written language is not readable, or not, doesn't flow very well. So there's, language issues are a big red flag, whether it's grammatical or spelling or stuff. And I would say most applicants do pretty well on the spelling and grammar. Those are fairly rare. Sometimes lack of readability is more common, and that's because I think often students rush through it, don't get adequate advice on their personal statement in terms of readability and in terms of editing that can really help with that kind of stuff, particularly students who are not native English speakers. There's some real obvious signs that you see in the written language when a student is not a native English speaker that really gives it away. And so I definitely think if you're not a native speaker, that you need to get multiple people reading your essays and helping you on that, and multiple people that are native speakers and really know how to write well. I think that's a big thing. So readability is a big issue, often big red flag. I think another red flag that comes to my mind that can be a real problem is language that is too confrontive, aggressive. Hello, Dr. Ryan Gray, you're here. We love you.
What's going on?
We're talking about big red flags in personal statements, and so I was talking a little bit about that, and I was talking about, sometimes people get very it's not often, but I have seen applications where they're negative, or they approach negative topics, or they come across as negative. And a good example would be they had a bad experience with a doctor at some point in their life, and suddenly all doctors are bad and they're going to save the world from bad doctors and blah, blah, blah. So that would be a
and the
big
physician reading it goes, so you think I suck, huh?
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah,
that's exactly right. So not a good thing to go down that road.
Yes.
So those are a few of my red flag issues.
Yeah, and in my mind, right, I always try to have students step back and take a look at what you're doing to present yourself.
Right.
And you've spent weeks, if not months, crafting this essay to show medical schools, look at me, look at who I am. This is my best foot I'm putting forward, and it's all negative.
Yes.
That gives the impression that you're not going to be very fun to hang out with for the next 4 years. That you're going to be in my office complaining about everything, right? The teachers suck, you could do it better. The attending suck, you could do it better. Your classmates suck. That's the vibe that you're putting off. And I'm not saying that's who you are, but that's the vibe you're putting off, and you don't want to do that.
Yeah, I completely agree with that. It's very and I think it comes across loud and clear to admissions committees when they read that type of thing, and it's a real turnoff. So.
Yeah. Well, we talked about this a little bit last week. in the Thursday workshops that we've been doing, talking about attributes, and someone had said, how do I make that distinction between autonomy, like having confidence in self to make decisions, versus being overconfident? And the good rule of thumb I always go back to, and Ryan, I think you say this too, is like, if you've got your blinders on and you're not looking left or right and you just believe in yourself, that's confident, that's good. If the reason you feel good is because you're comparing yourself to others and putting them down, then
that's not good.
Yes, you might have crossed the line there. Like that's something to dig into a little bit more deeply with yourself.
Yeah. Agreed.
Yeah.
I'm going to stay on for this one too, because it's MCAT.
Yeah.
So
oh boy.
I am planning to retake the MCAT. I'm sorry you have to. Good luck. I'm planning to retake the MCAT, and I plan to focus on practice questions and practice exams and test conditions. That sounds good. I've heard a lot of talk in the pre-med underworld about UWorld. Any thoughts on suggested question banks? Yeah, I mean, I haven't personally looked at the UWorld question banks. I'm a little bit out of the MCAT game now, so like you can lose currency pretty quickly. But I've heard that they're pretty good. I know that UWorld spends a lot of their resources on writing and editing. So hopefully they're not going to be rife with errors or anything. In terms of their quality, in terms of how close they are to AAMC, I'm not actually sure. But
I can give you student feedback. Students love UWorld.
Yeah, I hear a lot of good things.
They love you.
And for the question asker, I agree that lots of practice questions and practice exams are important. The only caveat I would give to that, and this is without knowing you personally or knowing your prior prep, is just making sure you do have the content down and at recall. Like I've seen students want to jump ahead to questions when they're still missing a lot of subject specific things. So like, for example, if you work with Blueprint, I don't know if they have this anymore, but for a long time, Blueprint had those like subject tests. So you could check your content knowledge. And it's basically the equivalent of like a discrete or a standalone MCAT question, right? Like if you're always getting the standalones right and you're missing passages, then you probably need passage practice. If you're still missing the standalones, then you might have some content gaps too. And almost all of the test prep companies offer some kind of percentage feedback where you can look at, not just what you got right or wrong, but like the categories and how you're doing. And that can be a way to make that distinction. But yeah, timed work is important. Yep. And I think it's fine to do timed passages and then timed sections and then work your way up to timed full-length exams. So, if you're struggling to get a passage done in, your 7-minute goal or whatever goal you have, then you don't necessarily need to do a full-length test to work on physics passages if that's the weak area. So I would slice and dice the way you do timed work, and question banks are good for that.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Absolutely.
Definitely.
Cool.
Rachel, what sort of questions or issues have you seen our mapped members struggle with? Not specifically when it comes to like using map software or the mapped kind of world, but what just in general the common questions, issues, confusion that's coming up that you see?
A lot of confusion over AP. And that is not on you mapped members or people who aren't in mapped who are listening. The more I dig into it, the more I see that AP is really confusing. Yeah. So as students who are in college prep or AP or IB, whatever your high school is offering you, you're sort of fed this message that it's really important to get as much advanced placement as you can, both to make yourself look attractive to colleges and also to get college credit out of the way. And then it turns out that for pre-med, some of those advanced placement credits, even if they counted as credit at your college, might not qualify as a prereq fulfillment. And then, there's lots of ifs and ands and buts here. So if you heard me say that, please don't panic. Like what I'm saying is go do your research. Because sometimes it does qualify. Sometimes it doesn't qualify, but higher level courses in the same subject will make up for it. So like maybe Gen Chem is not accepted as AP, but if you went on to take several extra semesters of chemistry, maybe you're a chem major, maybe you did lots of biochem, that might qualify instead. And what I'm seeing the more I dig into this, and part of why we were digging into it is to see if we could standardize it for MAPT. And a lot of med schools don't even have a clear yes, no on advanced placement. They might actually vary by subject. So we found some schools that said yes to English and physics, but no to bio and chem. So this is one of those things where even if you're 2 years out from applying, if you've got an idea of where you're going to apply, you're in a state with only a couple state med schools, so you're going to at least apply to all the ones that are in state and public. I would start looking at those schools' policies, and I mean, they do reserve the right to change them, so it could be different in 2 years. But if they're saying now something doesn't count, that gives you a chance to make a plan.
And I would go beyond that too. I would say if you're in high school and you're wanting to take a bunch of AP credit, just don't do it in the sciences. That's going to be, I think that's not going to change. They're not going to turn you down because you actually took Gen Chem and OChem and biology and physics in college. And my advice even to applicants these days is better safer than sorry in terms of getting good groundwork. I think that general chemistry is so foundational. Bio 1 and 2 are so foundational for everything that's going to come after that. Both in terms of MCAT prep, if you take those, but also in terms of satisfying prerequisites and stuff, you're not going to go wrong by actually taking the courses in college.
Yeah, well, and this gets a little bit tricky because there is enormous pressure on rigorous course load. Mm-hmm. If you're going to state schools for college, they are primarily looking at your numbers, what's your GPA, what's your SAT or ACT score. But especially if you're applying to a highly selective college as a high school junior or senior, the number one thing the more selective schools look at is rigor of course load.
Yep.
So what it's going to come down to is that you might take a bunch of APs because you're thinking maybe pre-med, but maybe engineering. I mean, I've got a nephew that's toggling between pre-med and pre-law. Like those don't have much in common, but so he's taking as many APs as he can, and then understanding that there's a chance that even though he got AP credit, he's still going to take calc again. I mean, he's someone who took calc BC as a sophomore. So by the time freshman year of college comes around, he's going to be rusty in calculus anyway. But one thing that I think, and a lot of the college listeners, since we have a lot more college and non-traditional than high school listeners, something that the college students here can confirm is college goes so much faster than high school.
Oh, yeah.
You will be thrilled if you got a 4 or a 5 on Gen Chem or in calc, and then you have to take it again. You're going to be really relieved that you know it so well, because it's still going to be work to earn the A because it goes so fast.
Yeah, agreed.
So yeah, sometimes it just means you're going to take it twice, and then hopefully that means that your foundation in that subject is outstanding.
Yeah.
I'm concerned about getting a DO, Doctor of Osteopathic Medicine, LOR letter of recommendation for the 2021-22 season because I haven't been able to shadow. Some DO schools require one. Do you think this might change, or will they just say, too bad? Too bad, so sad. So I'll lead real quick because I've had a bunch of communication with the ACOMAS team, the DO team. And it's one of these myths that like you have to have a DO letter of recommendation to apply to DO schools. And yes, there are 1 or 2 or 3 DO schools that require, most recommend. Obviously with COVID, I think everything's up in the air. So I wouldn't worry too much about having a DO letter of recommendation.
Well, and and my opinion always is in what I would ask this question, the student that asked this question, what I would ask back to them is what option do you have if you can't shadow a DO, so you can't get a letter of recommendation. If some schools say no, too bad. Then what option do you have? There's no question here. You put your application out there, and if some are going to say no, then they're going to say no. And I mean, there's nothing to do here. So don't worry about it, because if that's the way it is, then that's the way it is. So I think often pre-med students worry about things when there's no reason to worry, because you have no control over it. So. I would say don't worry about it. I agree with you, Ryan, that you just have to kind of go beyond that and just say, I do what I can. I do what I can.
I do what I want.
Yeah.
Whatever. Postbac student here. I'm currently taking biochem and a retake of Gen Chem. Previously got a C- while working full time. Unfortunately, financially, I have no other option. It seems as if this term, more than ever, I've struggled juggling it all. Would it look bad to have a pass, no pass grade for biochem and a letter grade for my Gen Chem retake? I'm thinking, depending on how my next exam goes in biochem, I might change to pass, no pass, as I don't want my GPA to be negatively impacted.
That's exactly how it's going to come across to the admissions committee. I'd say you gotta
that you did it just so your GPA wouldn't be affected.
Yep.
Yeah. Which would go. They probably were struggling with a B-, C+.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And particularly if you had another course in the same term that was graded, then I mean, if I was looking at that, I would say I know exactly what's happening here. So I don't think it's a good idea.
Yeah. I don't think so. So just in general, right? Pass, no pass, especially when COVID first hit, almost every school, they went to like mandatory pass, no pass.
Correct.
Like,
that's a different
pass, no
thing.
pass.
Yeah.
Completely different. Pass, no pass at this point, I think the assumption is going to be from medical schools that you should have figured it out by now, dealing with being at home and working and everything else. Obviously, I don't know if that's a valid statement. There's just so much that is still unknown and so much anxiety out there. So it's understandable that people are still struggling right now. But from a medical school perspective, I think they're going to expect letter grades from here on out.
Yep. Agreed. Totally agree with that. Oh, here's another good question. There's several good questions. Oh, yeah, this is a great one.
This is the same one. Next one.
Oh, no, there's another great one. Yeah, this is the one. Yeah.
Hello, I am an ER nurse and on my way to med school. I am planning to take my prereqs again. I'm planning to attend junior college. I have a master's in nursing already. How would it be viewed if I go back to a junior level college? My reason is to save money. Cumulative GPA of 3.1 with a science GPA of 2.65. And I'm assuming this follow-up, it's been 10 years since the student has taken prereqs is the same student.
Yeah, I would say that's agreed.
Yeah.
I think it's, well, I totally get the idea of saving money. I totally get that. However, don't think it's a good idea. I think having GPA that low, particularly science GPA, even if you pulled a great GPA at a junior college, the question could very well be asked, well, if she goes to a really super rigorous institution, what's this going to look like? Now, I think MCAT's going to be really important for this student to show that the science knowledge is there and the ability to use that knowledge in a meaningful way is there. Now, the issue here, if the issue is money and I think there's a difference between I want to save money or is the issue I don't have any other option. I understand wanting to save money. I get that. But the other question is some students, there's no option. They don't have the capability of doing it, as opposed to somebody who could do it. It would require some real changes, lifestyle and stuff, but it's doable. There, to me, there's kind of a difference there, but I think optimally, you do it at a 4-year school. Is it acceptable? Absolutely. Those courses count, they're accredited, et cetera. So, they're going to count toward the prereqs. The question is what it's going to mean to an admissions committee when they look at it and try to evaluate. Number one, are you prepared for the rigorous environment of the sciences in medical school? Number two, what? Well, I lost my train of thought, but anyway, so.
Yeah. So I think, Scott, talk real quick, briefly about kind of your optimal, suboptimal, categorization, because I think that applies here.
Yeah, I think that I try to categorize things in 3 ways. Optimal, this is the best case scenario option. Acceptable, this is the acceptable option, maybe not the best of all worlds, but depending on your circumstances, it definitely is acceptable or not acceptable. So I think in this case, junior college is acceptable. Yes, the courses are going to count. And if you do well, you're doing well. But again, there's that caveat. It is a non-selective environment. Basically, anybody can walk in the door and take classes. Yeah. And so, that's going to affect ostensibly how the courses are taught and the level of rigor that may be present. So optimally, I'd say go into a university where you have, and I think that's going to be how it's going to be looked at by an admissions committee is, it's acceptable in terms of meeting the requirements, but in terms of the competitive nature of the of medical schools, it may not be viewed quite as well. So, there's a lot of caveats there.
What's the role for, let's talk specifically the Texas application, since that's the one you're most intimately familiar with, the role of this optional essay potentially for a student like this who struggled early on, went back to community college, did really well. Is that optional essay a good place to say, I know my early grades struggled, here's why. I know I went to a junior college, here's why.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's definitely a place where you explain, kind of the situation. If you're not going to do that in a good bit of detail in the personal statement, which some students choose to do it there, at least in part, the optional essay is a great place to do that. Unique life experiences or whatever. And I've seen that a lot of where, secondary essays are also a place. Often they'll ask questions about adversity or, stuff like that. So absolutely to your question, that would be a terrific place to go into detail on that and to really explain in a very personal way, this is why I did it the way I did it. It was because of financial circumstances. I have a student I'm working with right now, very similar situation, who has always worked through college full time and everything, and by virtue of that, GPA is not strong at all, and given the opportunity to work, go to school full time and not have to work. Circumstances may be a lot better and GPA may be a lot better, but that takes a lot of assumptions on the part of an admissions committee. And I don't think, generally speaking, admissions committees like assumptions. I think they like reality. They like this is what we see in a concrete way, and they don't like to have to try to presume things.
Yep. Makes sense.
Yeah.
For the activities section of the application, is it appropriate to add multiple activities to one section? I've done a lot of small fundraising projects, toy drive, colorful Band-Aid drive for the Children's Hospital, and homemade mask drive. I really love fundraising in general and would want to make sure these events are highlighted, or should I just pick one? I like this question. Good kind of
I love
nuts
this
and
question.
bolts on how to work an application.
Yeah, and I totally agree.
Really, this question basically only applies to AMCAS because ACOMAS, TMD-SAS, they don't limit.
Yeah.
So,
no, you're exactly right. No, I completely agree with this in terms of lumping it all together into fundraising. And then in the description, you can kind of go into details about this is multiple projects and dealt with a lot of different things, but the common thread here was about, fundraising for various projects, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So I think for AMCAS, that's the way you got to do it, particularly if you have something that you definitely want to put in there. And I think this is a very appropriate way to do that. And then in the description, luckily AMCAS does give you a much longer description than TMD-SAS does. I forget what the length of a ACOMAS is, but AMCAS is basically double the length of the Texas application.
Yeah, so AMCAS description-wise is 700 characters, 1325 for that most meaningful. TMD-SAS is 300 500 for the most meaningful, and then ACOMAS is 600, and they don't have a most meaningful.
Yeah. So, but I think lumping it together for AMCAS, perfect solution.
Yep, definitely. Good way to do there. And you don't necessarily specifically have to mention everything that you did, but hours wise and potentially highlighting maybe the most impactful one to show that, or the way that this student asked the question, it sounds like maybe this should be a most meaningful. I think one of the mistakes that students make is they focus the most meaningful essays and experiences specifically on most meaningful around medicine. And I always challenge students to read exactly what the most meaningful essay is asking. It's not asking, why is this most meaningful to your journey to become a physician? It's asking you, what is the most meaningful activity in your life and who you are. And so it doesn't have to be related to medicine. And so this may be one of those to maybe in the description section kind of list out all of the different things that they've done, and then in the
meaningful thing.
Most meaningful, do the other thing.
Absolutely. I love that. I love that idea. Very cool.
So we seem to have gotten through all of our first questions, but a couple people who had asked have follow-ups, and we still have a couple more minutes. So I thought I would circle back. So one is, our student who had asked about getting a letter of rec from DO adds, well, I was thinking of Zooming a DO to at least speak with an osteopathic physician about their DO studies to get some perspective. She does have other shadowing. And says, not surprising, but my advisor pushed the DO LOR worry. Haha.
Yeah, unfortunately. Yeah, I think the Zooming a DO is a great idea if you can get a DO that's willing to sit down with you for 30, 45 minutes or something and just talk to them. I wouldn't suggest that you get a letter out of that, but I do think that it will give you some perspective and stuff like that. So yeah. And I'm sorry that your advisor was pushing the worry on the letter of recommendation. I think sometimes that comes out of just, I hate to use the word ignorance, but the lack of knowledge about the process and what's really required and stuff like that. And so,
isn't that the definition of ignorance?
Yeah, well, I just wasn't going to use that word.
It has such a negative word, but that's by definition.
I understand.
Yeah. I also think, it comes from a good place, because some of it is like the desire to dot every I and cross every T. Like, I don't want you to get eliminated on a technicality kind of feeling.
Yeah.
And I mean, it's why it's great to have you to help us kind of understand those things.
Yeah,
Okay, so one other follow-up. Our friend who was debating, since she's doing Gen Chem and Biochem, debating going to pass, no pass, she says, so this is just running hypotheticals. So let's say I get a C in Biochem. Would that be better than the pass, no pass?
I would say, yeah, I would say neither are better. Better is get a B or better. So I don't think that a C in Biochem is not good, but I also don't think going P, a pass, no pass is good either.
What about in this specific situation, right? Obviously, kind of in the pandemic, lots of things going on, maybe bit off a little bit more than they could chew this semester. What about, quote unquote, settling for that pass, no pass, and then trying to take an upper division biochem or something else for a letter
in the spring
as kind of like a makeup, so that it doesn't hurt the GPA right now, but then also shows in the future, look, I can handle it, and maybe they can see from credit hours or something that the student took a step backwards a little bit, but just kind of is maybe a little bit best of both worlds.
Yeah, I mean, I would say I guess in a situation where I guess the pass, no pass would be better than a C. I don't think either is a great option, but probably the pass is a better option than a C. I think following that up in the scenario you present, Ryan, I think following that up with something that is in the next semester or quarter or whatever would be advisable for sure. And but I think in terms of this, this particular student, and I'm not trying to make light of your situation. Let me just say that I'm not. I'm sympathetic toward your situation. But I'm trying to view it from the perspective of an admissions committee member when they've got 10 or 20 applications on their desk that they're trying to go through, and yours is right in front of them. I don't want it to be so easy for an admissions committee member just to say, I've got so many great ones piled up here on my desk, and here's just one reason to say no to this one. And I think you always want to try to avoid that if possible. So anyway.
Yeah. And I mean, to kind of underline your note of sympathy, I mean, the original question said, I'm taking these 2 classes and I'm working full time, and that's the only financial option I have.
Yeah.
So,
and I get it. Yeah.
Yeah. One of my thoughts was like, can you get yourself to, most colleges have, or postbac programs have some kind of study center? Like, can you get yourself into some free tutoring or free math or chem help?
Yeah.
I mean,
or you potentially, and I don't know if this would be possible, but I think it'd be worth a 10-minute conversation with your professor to say, would it be possible for me to take an incomplete and to finish this up, in the next semester or over the holidays, or, what are my options here beyond going just to pass, no pass? If you haven't talked to your professor about your options, absolutely do that. And see, sometimes professors will, have options that you don't know about and things that they could do with you. And so at least have a short conversation to let the professor know kind of what's going on.
Yeah. Yeah. I went to a science professor once because I was struggling in the class, and he gave me a couple hours of tutoring.
Yeah.
Yeah. I was just checking in to let him know what was going on.
Yeah. Yeah.
I didn't know he was going to volunteer his time to me. I mean, I was amazed.
Yeah. That's awesome. That's awesome.
So yeah, you never know what you're going to get.
Yeah.
All right. Well, I think that takes us mostly to the end of the night. Ryan, anything else you want to cover? Any pressing thoughts in your brain?
I don't think so. I'm just excited to keep playing with the new features we've added to Mapped, at least on the testing site, all of the feedback building algorithm stuff. So
yeah, absolutely. It's getting pretty cool.
Yeah.
And that's a very formal term, you understand, in formal academic world, cool is acceptable.
It's
like
like
a code word.
hinky.
If you see cool, you know.
Yeah. Or dope. You could use dope. That is dope.
Okay, Boomer.
Scott's Gen X.
Yeah. Mentally, I'm millennial, but no.
The more
Thank
I'm
you,
on
everyone.
TikTok, the more I think mentally I'm Gen Z. Like, I wish I was cool enough to be a real Gen Z.
Oh,
Oh,
gosh.
All right.
Well, love you guys. Love all of you out there. Keep your
Thank
heads up.
you.
Keep
See
strong.
everyone next week.
Take a deep breath, drop your shoulders. We're going to get through it.
We're going to get through it.
And check out eShadowing.
Yeah.
All right. Bye, everyone.
Bye-bye.